All right, have you ever wondered if your practice could benefit from hiring an admin and you're unsure if that person should be another in person admin or should you hire a virtual admin? So, here's exactly what we're going to cover in this video and in this training. I'm going to cover the pros and cons of each of those, both in person as well as virtual. I'm going to give you some hiring and some onboarding processes for each of those because they look a little bit different. And then I'm going to give you some pay considerations, which can be applied to both of those, as well as leadership and management. How is that going to look for in person as well as for a virtual admin? And so by the end of this video, you'll know exactly which type of admin, either virtual or in person, and you're going to know exactly what's going to be the perfect fit to help save you time as well as money. So let's dive in here. I think there's a lot of misconceptions. There's a ton of noise out on the internet as to, hey, you should hire a virtual admin, especially for the entrepreneur space who should go virtual. It makes a lot of sense. It can save you time and money, and I think that that is true, but it has to be the right type of implementation for both of them. And I think there's pros and cons to each, and I think there's situations where one actually may make more sense than the other. And this is coming from somebody who literally runs a virtual admin business in which we place U.S. based admins into practices, and we also do front desk training for practice owners as well. So let's get right into it now. Pros and cons of each of these, right? Because there's some things you want to consider as you're getting into it when you're coming in. So, what are the kind of pros of an in-person admin, right? Which can be huge for a business. I think the pros are they can be really great culture builders and really help with the customer experience standpoint. You're just not going to get that with a virtual admin. And that can be one of the biggest needle movers. Maybe you're a solo provider, you've got space for somebody like that to step into the practice, and now they're providing a really solid customer experience point for your people that are coming in. However, some of you guys don't have space and that just doesn't make sense for you at that point. Now, what are the other pros here? I think they're much easier to manage, right? Because if you have a question, you literally just walk right down the hallway and you ask them a question. And that can be tough for somebody if they've never had an employee before or they're not exactly sure um, how to go about managing someone. It is much easier to walk down the hallway and chat with that in-person front desk and help them see and do the things that might be required of them in person. What are the pros of a virtual admin though? Because there's certainly there are some, and I think the biggest and best thing about a virtual admin is that the talent pool is now much more open. Meaning you're not limited to your geographical location. So, what I'm seeing is especially in states where the wages continue to increase. Thinking California, thinking New York City, some other big kind of cities where now this wage is creeping up. It can get very expensive to hire top-notch admin talent. And when I can open up the pool to not only all over the United States, but potentially in another country as well, suddenly I can get really top tier, top-notch talent to be able to step foot into the practice, which is great. Now, what are the other benefits of it? I think the other major thing is now, especially if you have a busy office, is you get somebody who's very dedicated and very focused. Meaning they don't have 100 fires they're trying to put out. They don't have patients constantly walking in while they're trying to potentially close a new person on the phone, which is a big problem, right? Where now let's say that their role is only sales, for example, which is a common use case that I typically see for our remote admins is we usually plug them into someone's business to basically take over all of the new patient phone calls. And that works so well because now their one and only mission is to see a new lead come in. They can get to that lead very quickly. Let's say somebody opts in on Facebook and they get to them within 5 minutes, and then that person's on the phone, they're booked, they're ready to roll, which is an incredible resource as opposed to if they're in person. A lead may come in, they may have 4 or 5 new patients kind of come in, plus they're checking out the current people in the office, and there's a lot of layover, there's a lot of missed opportunity for someone who is handling the new leads, and that stuff kind of gets put on the back burner, which is not what you want put on the back burner. It's kind of the lifeblood of the practice, so to speak. So I think that's the best use case of a virtual admin is the talent pool's wide, I get somebody who's really dedicated to just taking over whatever task that might be. And I think a time sensitive task like lead follow up is a perfect one. Now, what are the cons of an in person admin? You're obviously the biggest one is you're limited by your talent pool and the people that are applying. Usually, like, you're not just gonna find an A player, like, casually off the street, right? Most of the people who have jobs, all the A players, they have jobs, right? Because they're an A player and they like to be a part of a solid team. And so certainly if you look to put an application out, let's say you have a need, in, November and December. It's the holiday season, like, people aren't looking for jobs, but you have a very direct need and now you're just kind of limited by who's applying at the time. And you're likely going to be attracting people who aren't A players because they don't have a job, right? Or they're looking around. And that's obviously not always the case, but it's just kind of a general thing that I see. The other big thing is the front desk oftentimes becomes the dumping ground for all things of the practice, and they take on way too much stuff. Meaning, you've got somebody who is they're doing insurance authorizations, they're calling for out of network benefits, they are uh, checking new patients in, they are calling new patients or referrals that are coming in, and now they're doing a 100,000 things, but nothing is being done well. And maybe they were performing well up to one point, and then now they've just taken on too much and they can't keep up with it. And that leads to a high turnover, especially at the front desk, right? And so that's definitely one of the biggest cons of the front desk is when they are in office, they just take on a lot of your shenanigans, right, so to speak. Now, what are the cons of a virtual admin as well? I think the biggest one is it's hard to find VA talent because you don't really know where to look. So the only place you go to look is usually through a virtual admin agency, right? You'll uh, Google search, you'll find maybe some healthcare admins, maybe they're located over in the Philippines, or maybe you found a US based group, and you're just kind of limited to the agency. And the agency has some pros in that they usually have talent. The cons of that, though, is that talent always isn't the greatest, or that talent oftentimes has a lot of turnover. And so you get somebody in, you kind of train them a little bit, and then that person ultimately rolls off and they try to get somebody new in. And you're kind of constantly playing that game, and you don't really have a say so in who ultimately steps into the business and how long they're going to stick around because you got a third party that's kind of in the middle, right? The middleman. That's what the agency is, right? You pay the agency plays the admin, and there's not real clear transference of trust as well as money. And that's kind of why we actually tried this early on. That's why we don't do that anymore. And we help everybody place the virtual admin directly and internally into the practice as opposed to outsourcing that somewhere else because you just get really poor quality and turnover. Now, what are some other cons of the VA? Sometimes they can be a little bit tougher to manage. Most of them are obviously very hungry, very dedicated to your team, but they also have to have a sense of direction. And if you're not good at giving people a sense of direction, you're probably going to have a hard time giving somebody a sense of direction if they're actually not face to face with you all the time. Now, there's some strategies that you can implement. We can talk about this here in the next phases of this conversation, but they are a little bit tougher to manage because you don't have as much face to face time with them. And because they are out on their own, and you got to be able to delegate stuff, and you got to know how to delegate stuff well, and have the personality to do it. So that's kind of the pros and cons. Again, some benefits of each, some cons of each, things to consider based on your own personality, as well as the dynamics of your office and the flow of things. Um, eh, I'll finish by saying virtual admin can definitely be very, very helpful for a sales standpoint. I know I mentioned that early on, but the sales component is often one of the greatest and most underutilized use cases for the virtual admin. Again, you just have to find the right talent, though. Now, let's move into the hiring as well as the onboarding portion of this. So, how do you hire and how do you onboard each of these people? Because it looks a little bit different, kind of, right? So if you bring somebody on in person, a hiring and onboarding process, like it's a little more of a familiar process to a lot of you. You throw an Indeed ad up, you pull your local network, and you run an interview process, and you kind of whittle it down, and maybe that person shadows a little bit, and you bring that person in and you select them. You're just more familiar with it. And then that onboarding process, usually they shadow the other person. Maybe you have some in office reading material that they can go over. They can learn a little bit more by doing alongside some other people in the office. Very familiar process to most of you. Some of you guys do make a mistake in that onboarding process though, and you just kind of like, all right, you can shadow for a week. Here's a notebook and some videos. Let me know if you need anything. And I don't think that's a great onboarding process. I think you need really clear cut timelines, expectations, and task to be done in that onboarding process as well. And don't just throw them a manual and hope for the best at the end of 7 days, right? Because they're not trained. Now, what does that hiring and onboarding process look like for a virtual admin? I think most of you don't really know where to find a virtual admin. You resort to agencies, you use websites, things like Upwork and some of these other common virtual admin websites, and you just get a little less control that way. And I think that that is definitely one of the tougher sides of this. But I think it's also going to depend on what task you ultimately want done as well, right? If you only want back end easy peasy task done, yeah, virtual admin agency makes a lot of sense. You can hire somebody over in the Philippines for really affordable pricing at that point, right? But in order to find good quality talent, you could throw an Indeed ad up. You could poll your local network and hire somebody locally and then just have them work remote. That's actually what we did for our first admin, just because I didn't know any better, right? I didn't know how to put an ad out and find somebody that lived across the country and actually lead them. And so most of you will resort to a website or an agency. Just beware of the pitfalls of an agency. And I mentioned that a little bit earlier, but you just get varying quality. You need to have complete say so and ultimately who steps into the business. Because if that person is not a great fit, you're going to have a really tough time being successful, right? And so that's kind of the hiring process with a VA. The onboarding portion can look pretty similar, but you need to be having regular check-ins and touch points with that admin, much like you would for an in-person admin. If you don't have ideally weekly meetings for the first couple of weeks blocked off, planned, you guys chat, you catch up, you cast some vision and some expectations, and that's ultimately what helps that admin be very, very successful. And it's critical that you guys have those steps in place. And onboarding can't be, hey, here's some videos, here's how we do things. Let me know if you need anything. Because now your tasks aren't going to be done like you want them and like you need them to. So that's the hiring and onboarding process. Let's move into pay considerations now. Again, I think the virtual admin makes a lot of sense if you are crippled by really high payroll taxes, really high cost of living in the area that you're in. A virtual admin can be perfect. I think it's also going to depend on the task that you need completed. If you're only needing cheap back end, put some stuff together for me, dude, hire somebody really cheap out of the Philippines or some other country and pay them 725. That's a lot of money to them, and they're bought in. Their English is great, and they crush getting stuff done for you, which is awesome. Now, the concern though is for other big client facing tasks. I think too often people want to use the front desk as, hey, I'm going to hire some cheap high school labor, some cheap college labor, and just put this person in and kind of hope for the best. And you need to be paying these people ultimately for what they're doing and for the work that they have. And if you can take care of a front desk, they're going to stick around, they're going to get stuff done even quicker, and they're going to be driving patients to the door, which is the most important if you have them doing client facing stuff. And what I typically see if we are working with a practice and we implement one of our virtual admins, I typically like to teach actually a commissions based pay, especially if they are driving new patients into the practice. If you're running ads or maybe they're just following up with leads in a timely manner, because now you can get full time coverage without having to pay somebody for full time hours, right? A lot of you guys can't afford to bring on another admin at 40 hours a week. And if I can bring somebody on as a commissions based employee, now that makes that process much, much easier and much more affordable. And the ROI just tends to be way greater. And these admins are now incentivized to actually get in and get these people scheduled. So that's some kind of pay considerations. Obviously, straight hourly works in some regard, but a lot of you guys make the mistake of paying somebody to do lead follow up. You pay them only for 15, 20 hours a week. And then now you've got these big lapses in your phone coverage during the most critical time. and that's lost revenue for your practice at that point, right? Now, finally, moving into leadership and management here as we look to wrap this thing up. Um, uh, Leadership and management should look somewhat similar, but it's got to be really buttoned up for the virtual admin. And honestly, even the in-person admin, these processes probably blur and overlap and look a little more similar than some of the other things that we've talked about up to this point, and that leadership and management should consist of very consistent meetings, either by phone call, by Zoom, whether they're in person, then block time in your schedule and actually meet with them. Oftentimes the mistake for the in-person admin is that you guys just kind of meet in passing, right, where you throw stuff at them as you're passing by between patients, and that can create a huge issue and a huge challenge for you. But set regular meetings, right? That think that's one of the most critical things from a leadership and management standpoint. The other one is actually taking phone calls and recording them and giving them coaching and feedback if they're doing client facing tasks is a massive, massive underutilized tool that a lot of practices aren't using, which baffles me that they're not blocking their phone call, they're not recording their phone calls and actually coaching their admin on it. So weekly meetings, phone call audits, and most importantly, let's get numbers on paper. What are the metrics that we need to be accomplishing? What do the numbers look like? How is that changing from week to week? And what is actually getting done, right? Because if I've got somebody who's doing client facing tasks, maybe they're rescheduling patients, they're following up with them, or maybe new Facebook leads are coming in and their job is to follow up with them. I need to be tracking those numbers and metrics for that position so that we can actually measure success. Are they being as helpful and as successful as the people as it was when I was taking them or somebody else in your office was taking them? And if that schedule is not staying as full as it was, then we've got a bottleneck at the front desk. We absolutely need to solve that. So both of those apply for virtual as well as in person. I think some of it will kind of depend on your leadership abilities. If you don't have a great deal of leadership abilities, the admin agency is probably going to be tough for you. Or maybe that's where you look to hire some of our services out, where we actually help you with all of the leadership and management, and you build it internally, which is a really great, solid option for you as well. So, uh, either way, that's all I've got for this particular video. You can check out the rest of our videos on our channel as you power through here, and we'll see you on the next video.